Welcome to Queering Arthur, a podcast where you can join us in exploring queer interpretations of Arthurian legend. I'm Kelly Oakler.
And I'm Dr. Shyla Rad.
Today we're talking about Culhwch and Olwen in the Mabinogion from the 11th century CE.
This podcast is for mature audiences. This episode contains a reference to a depiction of homophobic violence in media, reference to Nazis, liminality of adolescence in 20th century literature, discussion of objectification of women, gendered archetypes, discussion of homophobic policies and movements, reference to the Holocaust, and discussion of overbearing fathers.
If you're not comfortable with any of that, then we'll see you in the next one.
Starting with a high-level cultural view.
So let's look at a big exchange of ideas when the Normans conquered England in 1066.
Yep, Harold lost to William at the Battle of Hastings.
And after William defeated Harold...
They're
lesbians. And after the Normans defeated the English, it makes sense that the connection between England and France grew even stronger. But what about Wales? What happened there after the Battle of Hastings?
This big exchange of ideas got Wales better connected to the European trade routes.
That's an interesting idea. A lot of times people think of the past as somehow fundamentally different. But, the only real difference is the technology.
Yeah, evolution is slow, but technology is not just microchips or the cotton gin or the printing press.
What do you mean?
Well, technology is not just these tangible physical tools, although tools are a type of technology, but more broadly, technology is applying knowledge to achieve a goal in a reproducible way.
And they were applying knowledge to achieve what goals at the time?
So I'm thinking of that trade idea, the trade of ideas. This idea of guilds and apprenticeship programs were gaining popularity.
Like groups of people who did the same job? The Baker's Guild, the Builder's Guild.
Yeah, and not only the idea of guilds, but it was that guild membership required a standard of quality, standardization of vocation. That was a sort of technology.
So you, for example, couldn't bake bad bread or build bad buildings and be a guild member.
Yeah, I hope not.
And this idea of guilds with standardization, that's a type of technology. Yeah, I like that. An application of knowledge to achieve a goal. And the goal was money.
Yeah, money is a really great motivator. Greed. But I'm sure there were ethical and moral concerns of the guild members. Like building a good building meant people stayed safe, and baking good bread meant people stayed healthy. But yeah, the guilds were disbanded later because of their strong influence on the economy using strategies like collusion and price fixing.
This is a really great example of our approach, these hermeneutic methods. What if we look more at the role of politics within the tapestry of culture?
Tapestry?
Again? I didn't write this.
We wrote it together.
And I did the spell check and you undid it.
Yeah, the politics from the 9th to 13th centuries, rulers who contributed to Welsh unity and identity are remembered even down to today, like Rhodymar, Hwylda, Griffith ap Llywelyn, Owain Gwynedd, and Llywelyn ap Griffith.
I was looking these guys up, and of course they're all guys.
There were lots of women back then, though.
Yeah, but they were all in Latin.
Call back.
Hugh established a legal system which had rather progressive ideas on inheritance and divorce at the time, but it also codified social class, which was the opposite of progressive. It was oppressive.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it continues down to today. A lot of people, when they think of Wales, they have this mental image of strong class consciousness, like coal workers and metal workers going on strike.
And that's based on this history of oppression. Is that too aggressive?
No, it's like, great.
I was like, get on my soapbox. The law was keeping poor people at the bottom and making the rich richer, but also outside oppression from Vikings, Anglos, and Normans.
I didn't know you could get so indignant.
Vive la France!
Singing the song of angry men.
Yep.
Yeah, and then there was the English king, Edward I, who conquered Wales. He's the one in Braveheart who pushed his queer son's lover out the window, the defenestration.
I've never seen Braveheart.
Yeah, that's the 90s Mel Gibson, so it should be okay. It's about Edward I's subjugation of Scotland, but Edward also colonized Wales at the same time.
Dang, that guy sounds bad, like an antagonist in a major feature film or something.
He is depicted as ruthless, but he did a lot to develop parliament and constitutional monarchy.
So, murderous, but not authoritarian?
That's one way to see it, but just because someone can use the tools of democracy, like a parliament or a constitution, doesn't mean that they're not authoritarian. Democracy is always just a hairpin away from autocracy, and leaders with certain mindsets can use the tools of democracy to dismantle democracy itself.
Okay, so all the leaders were Christian.
Pretty much, I think that's true.
But we haven't talked about druidism much at all.
Yeah, like we skipped over the Vikings. We're not really touching much on the Druids. But overall, druidism was part of this integration of ideas. The word for that with religion is called syncretism.
So druidism, nature gods, the elements, and that divine feminine. Fusing these into Celtic Christianity is that integration of religions, that syncretism.
Yeah, I agree, and these persisted in the oral traditions, despite the growing influence of Christianity.
The oral traditions, it's like the Welsh poetry we were talking about last episode.
Yes, and this is the perfect place to zoom in now. Yeah, zooming in on the author. There are no authors.
No. Stop that.
Yeah, there were authors. There were writers, but it was a collective effort. It wasn't just one person that can be pointed to as the author.
I like that idea. It makes the text more diverse, like with the annals in the last episode.
Yeah, this story from the Mabinogion, Culhwch and Olwen, it is diverse, but unlike the annals, which was terse, dense, historical document, this story, it shows how all the people that contributed to the story added their own literary flourish and panache to that oral tradition.
Like Kinganeth?
Well, let's zoom in on the text. The Mabinogion is a collection of Welsh prose tales, likely dating back to at least the early Middle Ages, but the earliest surviving copies are from the 11th and 13th centuries. White says it may have been from as early as 950 CE, but it was certainly compiled by 1250 in the White Book of Rhydach. While White doesn't specify how he got this date, scholars can use linguistic analysis. Traditionally, it's done by comparing contemporary themes and motifs and unraveling the layers of interpolation. But today, linguists can use machine learning and neural networks to identify sentiments, named entities, parts of speech, syntax, dialect, and style.
Machine learning and artificial intelligence can do that?
Yeah, it can do that, but I don't think it can really express how integral the Mabinogion is to Welsh literature and folklore.
So it could write a paragraph about it, but not really express it.
Yeah, I think that's the nature of expression. Expression is human.
And now we're an AI podcast.
No. I, for one, welcome our new AI overlords.
Just in case they're listening. So, the Kinganav.
Well, the Mabinogion is prose, not poetry.
So it's not in the poetic tradition, but it's still an expression of Welsh literature and folklore, like Arthuriana.
Yeah, Welsh literature and folklore is the original source of Arthuriana. And the Mabinogion is influenced by Celtic and Arthurian legends and Christian narratives. The magic and otherworldly encounters in the Mabinogion rooted in Celtic folklore and tradition. The portrayal of heroes, quests, and themes of chivalry and honor solidify its Arthurian content, and Christian narratives infuse moral and ethical dimensions into the stories.
Okay, then, what else about the Mabinogion? Is there more intertextuality?
There are different versions of the Mabinogion that can be compared.
And the machines do this?
Yeah, like we've been talking a lot about. We're an AI podcast now. No, I'm sure there are artificial intelligences, AI models that can do that sort of work, but it doesn't take an expert to know that writers have a purpose in writing.
Like entertainment and education.
Yeah, or adapting pagan myths to fit Christian frameworks and convert everyone. Or portraying certain rulers in a favorable light for political favors. Or reinforcing societal norms like class hierarchy and patriarchy.
Propaganda.
That's your indignant class consciousness again, Kelly. Medieval Welsh propaganda. That's right. Like all superheroes.
Truth, justice, and the Welsh way.
Is that a reference to superheroes?
It's a riff on the old Superman motto, truth, justice, and the American way.
And that's American propaganda, like during World War II or something. Punching Nazis, right? Superman punched Nazis.
Superman did punch Nazis. So did Captain America. But he kind of still punches Nazis.
But I think the difference between propaganda and superhero stories or other folklore and literature like the Mabinogion is that it has this supernatural element, these quests that people go on. Propaganda doesn't really have that.
Yeah, especially I think if we're talking about superheroes in our culture, because our superheroes are serialized stories. So they sort of reflect whatever's happening right at that time. So they might have the supernatural elements or other things like that, but they don't follow the same sort of story arc that a folklore hero might. They might, at the very beginning of their story, have their call to heroism, but it very much branches off from there.
So unlike these serialized comics that are fit to their day, maybe these other supernatural quests are more thematic. They are timeless. Themes are embodied in the characters, like an archetype.
Yeah.
Like this call to action you said, that's kind of what happens to Culhwch in our story.
Yeah, so Culhwch is on a hero's quest. Joseph Campbell's 1949 book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, looks closely at the hero's journey, the monomyth, theorizing that it was a story structure that had been used throughout time in folklore, and that it can be distilled down to 12 steps, which are the ordinary world, the call to adventure, refusal of the call, meeting the mentor, crossing the first threshold, test, allies, enemies, approach to the innermost cave, the ordeal, the reward, the road back, the resurrection, and returning to the ordinary world whence they came with a gift or boon. That might sound like a lot, But we know lots of characters like this. Pop culture's full of them. Luke Skywalker, Bilbo Baggins, Frodo Baggins, Sailor Moon. They all go on the hero's journey with very little deviation, honestly. Luke Skywalker on purpose follows the hero's journey.
Yeah, George Lucas wrote Star Wars like in the 60s and 70s, and that was pretty soon after Joseph Campbell had written his work about the monomyth.
Yeah, and Star Wars uses a lot of the hero tropes and archetypes. He uses things from different folklores and more obviously from different media and other cultures. A lot of it's meant to feel like a Western or like an old samurai movie.
So unlike these old samurai movies and Westerns or Culhwch and Olwen, George Lucas had access to the philosophy and theory of the monomyth, but the original myths were being created just out of this like cultural osmosis that people had been gaining and were building up and were repeating without really knowing that they were working off of some sort of pattern.
Yeah, it seems almost just like a human nature sort of subconscious desire for certain things sort of leading to this particular type of story and this particular type of character that goes through these trials and comes out the other side.
So there's more than one type of story. I mean, Joseph Campbell called it the monomyth. I don't know if that means he thought there was only one story, but so are you saying there's more than one type of story?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you were telling me Superman is a Moses story.
Yeah, Superman doesn't have, this sort of arc, right? Not only because it's a serialized story that changes constantly, but his original story, his origin story, he is sent away from his family to save him and is taken in by someone else to be this savior in this new planet. And it was written by two Jewish men. They basically created a superhero that they could look up to. So it's just like Super Moses, basically. And funnily enough, that's also Goku's backstory for anyone who is into Dragon Ball Z.
Kakarot.
Yeah. R.I.P. to Akira Toriyama. But it was a very similar story, right? Where becomes this savior of our planet, even though he's not from here.
So here's another one. What about Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye? Is that like this epic quest?
I haven't read it, but I don't think so. That's more of an internal story, isn't it?
Oh, so when it's internal, it's not really a hero's journey.
Yeah, I think that makes it more go back to when you think about writing and it's like, what's the conflict? And is this, man versus self? And I think that doesn't fit into this story structure per se. It could fit within it, but it wouldn't be the main driving force, I think. Because if you look at, like, if we use Luke Skywalker again as an example, the, approach to the innermost cave sort of thing of like seeing his reflection back at him, like that's an internal thing he's going to deal with, right? Like finding out who his father is and how that will affect him. But that wasn't the first steps of the journey, and it wasn't like what drove the story originally.
Yeah, and from what I remember about Holden Caulfield is that like the hero's journey, where there's these tests and challenges and ordeals and the reward, Holden is trying to navigate this liminal space of adolescence between childhood and adulthood, or this space between being a non-sexual being to being a sexual being who might be trying to understand norms of masculinity and sexuality and accepting or rejecting their fear of the non-normative. Well, since you haven't read Catcher in the Rye, I know you've read Sunstone. Is that a hero's journey?
It's a romance story. Thank you very much. No, it's not really a hero's sort of story. It's just a story about two people falling in love.
I think since Joseph Campbell wrote that, there's been a lot of other sorts of models like that for comparative literature. Someone was telling me about the heroine's journey, which kind of deconstructs and adapts the masculine individualist imperatives of the hero's journey and reconstructs them to be more feminine, like less individualistic and more working in a community. I don't know if that's true or not to call that sort of thing feminine, but it's the deconstruction of hero and reconstructing it as the heroine, which makes it feminine and less masculine.
Do you have an example?
No, but maybe there is something like that in something you've read. Maybe it has more of that inner quest that might at the same time have this outer quest, like in Culhwch and Olwen, that it has this text, which is that outer quest, but then there's this inner quest of the subtext, which we can read into. And the subtext, that's where the queer stuff is.
Unless you're Sunstone, and then it's the main text.
Now, let's get to the queer stuff by not just zooming in on the text, but looking at the text with a queer lens. On page 7, Culhwch says, "Everyone has his boon but me." This is the first of many references to a wife in a way that I find questionable. However, boon is not just an object and is not necessarily objectifying the spouse. Rather, a boon is a blessing, a gift, some sort of thing that helps. It's related to the same root word for bee, as in spelling bee, where a bee was originally a community gathering. Like an apple bee was a gathering of apple farmers who would help each other in the apple harvest.
Oh, okay, so another linguistic tangent.
Sorry.
Well, Olwen is the maiden, according to Joseph Campbell's concept of the hero's journey, who just serves as a supporting character to inspire the man.
In a way, but I think for Campbell, the maiden is also associated with purity, fertility, and nature's bounty, which is problematic in a way, but the maiden is also symbolic of creativity and transcendence. So while making all these things specifically feminine isn't necessary, it is a window into the cultural context of the story.
Exactly. These archetypes pigeonhole women into roles of purity and fertility, which can be exclusionary.
Archetypes might pigeonhole some women, but for me, Campbell's ideas of creativity and transcendence being traditionally labeled feminine, it's insightful for me personally on my gender identity journey.
So it could be exclusionary to some, but freeing to others.
Yeah, I think so.
So zooming out, although Culhwch is referring to Olwen as a boon, which at first glance might seem objectifying to women, a boon carries with it the idea of gratitude and working together.
Yeah, and that's why this utterance is somewhat authentically queer and scores a 1 on the queer authenticity scale. Okay, next in the story of Culhwch and Olwen is the queer utterance on page 8. It says, "They came to a wide open plain and saw a fort. And when they thought they were near to the fort, they were not nearer than at first. Then Culhwch, he arose and slew 9 gatemen." So here, Culhwch is yearning for his boon, but must cross a seemingly never-ending field and fight those who would stop him.
Like in Monty Python, where Lancelot just keeps running through the same field, it just keeps starting over. Because he's going to save the maiden singing in the tower.
Yeah, and he just indiscriminately kills people, and it's ridiculous. But in Monty Python, it's gender swapped. The maiden is actually
an effeminate prince.
The femboy.
Maiden is an effeminate man. I can't wait until we look at Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yeah, soon, hopefully. It'll be a members-only episode, or maybe we can do like a watch party with members.
Or both.
Or both.
But so why is this queer?
So with the queer lens, this made me think about the ebbs and flows of queer inclusivity over time.
Like ups and downs. Like bottoms and tops.
Very nice. Yeah, I had an internal idea about this, and I read through like some LGBTQ history articles. And so there's this pattern of a good thing happening for queer inclusivity, but it's also not great. Like in the 1800s in the UK, that was the last known death sentence for homosexuality. And oral sex between men, but not women, was criminalized.
That sounds bittersweet, because it highlights that the death sentence used to be the punishment.
Yeah, and the punishment for gay sex was reduced from death to 10 years to life.
It's good and bad, because the sentence was reduced, but there was still a punishment.
And oral sex between men was criminalized.
But not women.
Nope. I'm not really sure, but there's this anecdote about Queen Victoria that when they wrote the law, they didn't want to have to explain lesbian sex to Queen Victoria. But I've heard that that's just a urban legend.
Yeah, it's been a journey with ups and downs. Like, the Holocaust was, of course, terrible and horrifying moment in LGBTQ history. So what would the positive side to that be?
Yeah, the Holocaust was horrifying. No wonder Captain America punches Nazis. But it was just 3 months after Hitler killed himself that gay bars reopened in Berlin. And 3 months after that, drag shows resumed. And it continues. In 1967, homosexuality was decriminalized in England and Wales. But that was a whole 10 years after the Wolfenden Report recommended to do so. From 1973 to 1980, homosexuality was removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual from the American Psychiatric Association, but Robert Grant and Anita Bryant at the same time were leading anti-queer groups. Gay rights were officially discussed at the White House for the first time, and the U.S. Democratic Party endorsed gay rights. In 81 through 83, this was the founding of the Moral Majority, and their leader calling AIDS the gay plague. But then in 83 and 84, Gary Stubbs became the first openly gay U.S. congressperson, and Chris Smith, the first openly gay UK parliamentarian. And from 86 to 88, Margaret Thatcher's government passed the anti-queer Section 28 law, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld sodomy law, but only for homosexuals.
Anal for me, but not for thee.
That's got to be another sticker. Like a quote, we'll attribute it to the U.S. Supreme Court, 1986. Zooming out, the yearning for something we can envision is applicable to sexual attraction, like Culhwch felt for Olwen, and to the ebbs and flows of queer rights. That's why this utterance is authentically queer and scores a 2 on the queer authenticity scale. And here's the next one. I'm not really sure if it's Culhwch describing Olwen, but it's a description of Olwen. Yellower was her head than the flower of the broom. Whiter was her flesh than the foam of the wave. Whiter were her palms and her fingers than the shoots of the marsh trefoil from amidst the fine gravel of a welling spring. Neither the eye of the mewhawk nor the eye of the thrice-mewed falcon, not an eye was fairer than hers. Whiter were her breasts than the breast of the white swan. Redder were her cheeks than the reddest foxgloves. Whosoever beheld her would be filled with love of her.
Right. So this is a love based on body parts. That's objectifying.
Right. I can imagine some medieval Welsh bard reciting this part of the story to this greasy, red-in-the-face regional lord chomping on a lamb chop and getting hot in his pants thinking about Olwen's boobies.
So, zooming out, treating people as objects and property is as old as property itself. Although slavery is illegal, it still exists, and objectification and patriarchy certainly exist. There's a fine line between lust and objectification.
That's why this utterance is inauthentically queer and scores a -2 on the queer authenticity scale. And this last queer utterance from the selection of the White Anthology is Olwen speaking to Culhwch. She says, "My father has sought a pledge of me that I go not without his counsel."
Olwen is the daughter of an overbearing and overprotective father, Ysbaddaden, a giant.
A literal giant.
Figurative.
Literally figurative.
A mythical giant. And his actions seem to reinforce patriarchal norms like viewing the daughter as a valuable commodity and personal property.
Yeah, but in the story, there's this added element that Ysbaddaden supernaturally cannot survive past his daughter's wedding, and that makes it a little more complex than this simple overbearing father narrative, I think.
Doesn't that just reflect the cultural context of a daughter who was property of the father then becomes property of the husband after marriage?
Well, that's true. It does reflect that. That was a fact of the time, but I was thinking it might also represent a father's personal growth through seeing his daughter move on to a new stage in life. Maybe psychologically, that's why fathers have been known to be overbearing. They see their daughters growing from girls to women, and that represents the father's growth from young to old. And seeing their daughter grow like that means that they're getting closer to death, and it's a threat to their very life.
So zooming out...
Yeah. Ysbaddaden's curse and what it represents, either patriarchy, like you correctly pointed out, or a testament to personal growth, that's really complex. That's why this utterance is somewhat authentically queer and scores a 1 on the queer authenticity scale. We want to express our sincere gratitude to all of our friends and our family, and especially any patrons who are signing up and joining us in our virtual roundtable. As always, we're very grateful to Andrew Chard for supplying us with the audio equipment, and to all of our listeners. This wouldn't be possible without you. We acknowledge this podcast was recorded on the traditional land of the Culhwch and Olwen tribe and Nisqually tribe. We support the mission of the Nisqually tribe to perpetuate their home and their culture by helping their people thrive, and we support the mission of the Culhwch and Olwen tribe to maintain the pride, honor, and dignity that is their traditional way.
And now, the announcements.
On our Patreon, we're introducing a new level to our virtual roundtable. In the past, we've had a $1 level. You can be a retainer, part of the queer retinue. But starting now, there is a new level, the Knights. You can be a Knight of the virtual roundtable. One of those benefits, I think will be very inviting to many of you, is that there will be members-only episodes, and you can check out all of the enhanced benefits of the Knights level on our Queering Arthur Patreon, and you can find the link through our website, queeringarthur.com. And keep your eye out for the special announcement, and that is planned for episode 9. This is the last episode with a strong focus on Wales. The next 5 episodes will be on the Arthurian hagiographies in a special 5-part series. where the high-level cultural view will take the form of a radio play and focus on the religion of the time, which will be available to members only. Then we'll spend time on Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regnum Britanniae, which will then shift the high-level cultural view back to regular episodes, and the focus will be on English culture. Although Geoffrey was likely Welsh, he lived and worked in Oxford, and dedicated his work to English Norman aristocrats. Episodes after that will round out the Brute Chronicle tradition, then the Scottish Chronicles, and then we'll get to the early French romances, the Vulgate cycle, and the German and English romances. And then, that's the end of the Richard White anthology. But it's certainly not the end of Arthurian legend. So stay tuned. We're excited to see where we can go with all of you on our quest of queering Arthur.
Next time on Queering Arthur.
Yes.
You can find us online on most social media. You can email us at queeringarthurpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram for behind-the-scenes looks at Queering Arthur Pod. Twitter and Facebook at Queering Arthur, where we'll have education, polls, and other engagement. And look for us on YouTube and TikTok for some fun shorts. And you can find links to all these things on our website at queeringarthur.com.
Now that you know a bit about comparative literature methods like the hero's journey and heroine's journey, let me leave you with this. Were medieval writers aware they were using such archetypes, or were they unconsciously repeating the monomyth across cultures? Stay chivalrous, Queerthers.